Joined in studio by Andrew Langer with Institute for Liberty and Carrie Pickett with Breitbart News, both in studio. Andrew, thanks for being here. Carrie, thank you for coming in as well. Carrie, we have a lot of different things we want to start with here. There's so much stuff happening, and normally we talk, Andrew and Carrie, about during the holidays. It's like it's such a quiet time, but this has been anything but that. But we were talking before we went on air, Carrie, about the Feinstein, the bill. We called it an assault weapons, but it's much more than that. What's your take on what's going on with that?
Well, first of all, one of the things that I noticed after looking at a number of reports was that she's dropping this bill, and we haven't even seen a police report. In fact, the Connecticut State Police said, even I think about almost last week, that we're not going to be seeing a report from them for several months. So that means that Dianne Feinstein is dropping this bill blind, and that's pretty disturbing. Also, we've heard numerous claims from pundits and different reporters, whomever, that Nancy Lanza did not secure her weapons.
Right.
Well, the fact of the matter is, we don't know that. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. I called up the Newtown police this afternoon, and I said, can you confirm these claims that Mrs. Lanza did not secure her weapons? And the Newtown police officer said, I can neither confirm nor deny that particular claim. So, that being said, the whole point here is that we don't know what the situation is.
There's so much information here, guys, that we don't know about this. And we were talking about this. It's been how long since this happened, and we're still waiting for information. But the point you make, Carrie, is perfectly legitimate. There were folks on the other side of the issue with legislation ready to go, and you could see it as soon as this thing happened. And literally, to my shock and dismay, literally minutes after this thing happened, people were out and basically pushing for their agenda. It didn't matter what had happened, who had been affected. It was sad.
Well, sorry, I was just going to say, John, I mean, it gets down to, first of all, the way that we seem to be doing things now in America, which is to, as the administration said, never let a crisis go to waste. Which is a very dangerous way of doing things. I mean, not only is it the issue of how rights can get trampled upon, but it's also, just from a public policy standpoint, the worst way to engage in public policy making. What characterizes this particular set of circumstances differently is we're now in an era in which the vitriol from the progressive left has become so acerbic, so destructive, so just horrible. You know, you cannot have an actual discussion over the merits of this. It all becomes retaliatory and accusatory. I went on there to sort of talk about the realities of rights and what, you know, the Bill of Rights means. And I had some editor at Random House just doesn't even know me, just start to just use the worst language against me in responding because he had no actual ground to stand on.
And we saw this, guys, in so many different places. Not only you're talking about on the Hill in policy, but the sad part is on the air with the media. Everyone's talking about Piers Morgan, and his reaction to this is just over the top. And like, when did the left go? And this is the left on the air. Obviously, he's obviously a left-leaning anti-gun person. When did we go from being a reporter to? I mean, I'm not even talking about an activist. I'm talking about an angry, vicious activist.
Oh, well, keep in mind, a number of activists end up going into the actual public sector. So sometimes it's difficult for them to shed that activism from them, and that a lot of that acerbic language that we had Andrew here talking about. I mean, look, we just had Harry Reid, for example, calling Speaker Boehner, I think, a dictator. We also had Steny Hoyer also making some pretty acerbic comments as well. So it doesn't just reserve itself from a lot of the radio people like Ed Schultz or even Mike Malloy, for that matter.
Right, yeah, the people on the air, but people, I guess, up on the Hill as well.
Yeah, well, John, I mean, for me, I think it was, you know, you have members of the media who recognized early on that the president was not who he was not who he claimed to be when he won in 2008. And with the rise of the Tea Party movement, their worldview, their prevailing narrative, and the rise of new media organizations like Breitbart, which don't have to answer to a major group of advertisers. They obviously they have to make coin, but they are activists in their own right. They're not bloated organizations like the New York Times or the Washington Post or what have you. The point is, once those institutions began to rise up, they have to be aggressive and have to, at least in their own minds, sort of take this extremist role in defending this emperor who has no clothes. And frankly, a philosophy that has no clothes. And so that's where you get the Piers Morgans rising up, who sort of have this agenda that they've been able to mask for so long. So
well, that's the only way that the other side's ever going to be heard.
Yes.
Yeah, and I was going to say, guys, basically, at first, the people on the left had to deal just with talk radio.
Yes.
Thought maybe they had that under control. Then you talk about rising new media.
Sure.
That's going to the right as well. So much. It seems like the people on the right know how to get their ideas out better, and it really frustrates them because these are guys who are supposed to be mainstream anchors, on places like CNN and other places like that, MSNBC, and they're anything but that. Well, they're vicious, like I said, activists.
There is a fundamental war over this prevailing narrative in the media, and it is one of these things where they control the major media outlets. They do. I mean, they ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, et cetera. And most of the print media as well. And so they have to sort of push back in this way. Now, the only way that they've really been successful in this, because obviously you have the Air Americas of the world, which sort of collapsed under their own weight. We see newspapers collapsing all over the country. The only one that's been successful at it is Jon Stewart, and that's because they know that, using these, and I don't invoke Saul Alinsky very often, but using the tactics of ridicule, the smarminess, the snark.
He's clever.
Yeah, he's clever.
But you know what, though? Even a perfect example, and of course we saw this with the NRA's executive director, Wayne LaPierre, was with David Gregory. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have certain anchors who will be horrific in a very subtle way. Right. And funny how things sort of come around.
When you're breaking the law when you do that, it's funny.
Exactly.
How those chickens are coming home to roost. Speaking with Andrew Langer, Institute for Liberty, and Carrie Pickett, Breitbart News. Guys, now shifting gears a little bit, nothing we were talking about before we got on the air was about what happened up in New York State. We've been talking about it's amazing the amount of stories here in this time of year. This is another one that has resonated not only with folks in the Northeast, in New York State, but around the country. The release from the News Journal up there of this list of gun owners has just touched off a firestorm. Carrie, what are you hearing about it?
Well, it's interesting because, of course, a number of people who have those red dots assigned to them, I can imagine they're not happy about it whatsoever. But I also know for a fact personally from some family members who don't have red dots in their neighborhood, they are absolutely angered just by the fact that they know that criminals can just look at that map and zero in on it. And I mean, I got a call from a family member who told me, how can I get a red dot?
See? This is where I sort of went with this, because on the one hand, it's a huge violation of these people's privacy. On the other hand, it also seems to me to be a pretty good map for criminals to say, okay, here are the houses with guns, here are the houses without guns. You guys decide which ones you're going to go after.
Yeah, and here was my take on this whole thing. It's the opposite of the whole idea with concealed carry, and for folks being armed like this and not knowing is the bad guys don't know who's armed.
Yes, that's right.
And everybody wins with that. With this, it has the opposite effect. Like you said, Carrie, we know there's no one in your neighborhood. It's sort of the opposite of like neighborhood watch, where there's no neighborhood watch. Yeah. Come on in and knock yourselves out. And here's my thing I want to ask both you guys. Both being folks that work in the media. The guys at the News Journal very weakly try to defend their position as something they had to do, but was there a justification? Was this a newsworthy reason? Were they doing this? Do you see any redeeming value in doing this other than diming out a lot of honest gun owners?
I think, first of all, this is a very liberal news outlet, number one. Number two, Gannett is having its own financial issues. And so even though they are immersed in this controversy, they're loving it at the same time because they're getting a lot of attention. But, keep in mind, New York City gun permit holders, they are publicly listed. A lot of people, don't know that. You don't need a FOIA request to find out who owns a gun permit in New York City. So, very often, sometimes you'll have some newspapers who will go to that public list and they'll say, "Oh, look at this, Howard Stern, he's a gun permit holder," and this particular, Donald Trump, he's a gun permit holder, and they'll go through all that list and they'll find all the celebrities on there. But of course, there's just average gun permit holders in New York City who have it. Of course, it's very few and far between, but still, they're out there.
Right.
For me, it's one of these things where, in order for it to be newsworthy or to rise to the level of newsworthiness, then there has to be some sort of characterization that there is something either very, very right or very, very wrong with these people who have these guns. I don't think that there's anybody who's making the claim that Gannett was printing these names as a way of celebrating them and their gun ownership, whether it's Second Amendment rights or Ninth Amendment rights or what have you. So what they were doing was they were trying to cast aspersions on them by doing this, classify them as somehow defective or wrong in the wake of Newtown. And in that regard, no, it was fundamentally not newsworthy, fundamentally beneath the standards of journalistic ethics.
They're protecting themselves, saying, well, we had to do this because we're a newspaper and we're blah, 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 blah. But no, they used the freedom of information, and they used their ability, their clout as a newspaper to like you said, to out these people and put them out there.
Carrie and I both grew up in Westchester, so this was our hometown, as it were, paper of record, and it's never been known for its journalistic quality.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a second or third tier Gannett paper, as it was, because in New York you have the Times, the News, the Post, and Newsday, and no one ever before there was the Reporter Dispatch. Now it's the News Journal and LowHUD.com, and you go there, you get the local high school sports scores, and that's about it.
And you get the funnies and the crossword.
There you go. That's exactly
there
right.
you go. The fish wrapper, we like to call it.
Exactly.
So, and we also know, guys, that these guys had done this before, so it wasn't the first time they pulled a stunt like this. All right, Carrie Pickett, Breitbart News. Andrew Langer, thanks for being with us here on NRA News, Cam and Company. Thank you.
Always.
Sure thing.